Fear and uncertainty. That's how a Notre Dame student describes her quarantine experience over the weekend. Here's a look at the Notre Dame dashboard, which tracks coronavirus cases on campus. The university is reporting 222 cases right now, up 73 from yesterday. Operation Education reporter Tolly Taylor broke the story Monday, how some students said they were struggling to get tested. And tonight he's talking with a student who was quarantined. That student claims that process was anything but transparent. Tolly, this has been a confusing experience for her.
She might say that's an understatement. From a complicated testing process to having to get her parents involved to get her food, to uncertainty about how long she'll be kept in quarantine, the student says she's still searching for answers.
It's like kind of scary being here alone without any information.
When this Notre Dame student woke up Saturday morning with a fever of 101.7, she says her first thought was to use on-campus testing to find out if she has coronavirus. By the time I spoke to her in quarantine on Sunday evening, she had more questions than answers.
My number one thing is they did not tell me how long I'm going to be here for.
She says she filled out Notre Dame's daily wellness check when she woke up Saturday and received a red pass. That means you get a direct phone number for the campus COVID hotline, and she started calling it right away. After more than 2 hours of calling, she got through to a nurse at 1:18 Saturday afternoon.
Someone's going to call you later today. And I was like, okay, perfect. No one called me.
She says she woke up Sunday and still had a fever, so she started calling again. But no one picked up, so she made an appointment at a Rite Aid in Niles. She kept calling Notre Dame and eventually got through.
And she was like, oh, actually we don't do rapid testing. Our turnaround time is 2 to 5 days.
That information isn't in line with what Notre Dame Vice President Paul Brown told me on Friday.
Test results tend to be turned around quickly, within a day or two.
The student says after speaking with a Notre Dame nurse, she planned to get tested in Niles. But a Notre Dame doctor called her a few minutes later and told her she could get a rapid test at 12:30 on Sunday.
I was just shocked because the lady earlier had told me that they couldn't do that.
She says the doctor told her, based on her symptoms, she should expect to test positive and be quarantined.
So my roommate was just suggested, pack a bag in case.
She packed school books and one change of clothes and went to the Notre Dame on-campus testing site where she tested positive.
There was a room that they had and there was a bunch of chairs and it was already filled with people. It was everyone who tested positive.
She sat there for about an hour when someone gave her an envelope with a key and apartment number. They also gave her a clear plastic bag.
This is the bag I was handed. It was 2 bottles of water, some salt packets, and Tylenol, and tissues.
She says the bag also contained pamphlets like this one, instructing students about resiliency through tough times, spiritual well-being, emotional well-being, and for some reason, a parking pass. She was then taken with 2 other students who tested positive in a van like this one. The driver wore protective gear and drove them to the Foundry lofts and apartments for quarantine.
I figured out which apartment was mine. I came in, there's nothing here. There's no food.
Her first call, she says, was to her parents.
My dad actually called the university and was like, excuse me, there's no food here. What's going on?
She says she arrived in the apartment at 2:30, and even after her father called the university, it took until 8:20 for her food to be delivered. That delay in response and the lack of communication from the university has her frustrated.
And I just feel like the university is not doing a great job of being transparent with us.
I reached out to Brown again on Monday, Tuesday, and today after my Sunday interview with this student. He responded today with this statement. The university has a team dedicated to monitoring the students in isolation and quarantine to make sure they are receiving food deliveries, any maintenance issues are addressed, etc. The student says the apartment has no dishes to cook with and no utensils or plates. There's attention to detail in some ways. There's a small bottle of shampoo in the shower, but not in others, like the fact that there's no shower curtain.
Wow, Tolly, you did get an update from the student today, though.
She's now learned she'll be in the apartment for 10 days, and the issues with food delivery have continued. She says Notre Dame's COVID response unit didn't deliver food until around 3 p.m. Monday afternoon, and she never received dinner that night. Since Sunday, the 2 bags of food she's received from the university had disposable utensils, but the sandwiches have all had meat, even though an official told her they marked her as a vegetarian. The central theme, she says, is that everything is, quote, incredibly disorganized.
And we hope she gets better as well. Tolly, thank you.
I asked Notre Dame Vice President Paul Brown about the seniors' experience. This student was refused a test despite being in close contact with 2 people.
Well, yeah, okay, so let me stop you there. The close contact is in the judgment of medical experts.
But the senior tells me the nurse never asked him how long he was with the two people who tested positive, or how close he got to them. If she had, he would have told her, for instance, that he spent about 15 hours less than 6 feet away from his girlfriend Monday and Tuesday, and they spent the night in the same bed.
So I'm here in my apartment quarantining because there was no real directive.
He went on to tell me the contact tracers called his girlfriend on Saturday, 5 days after she tested positive, and she told them about the time with her boyfriend on Monday and Tuesday. As of today, the senior has still not heard from contact tracers.
We'll look into those cases where students feel they haven't received the proper information.
This graduate student tells me she woke up Thursday morning feeling terrible, with a headache, a dry cough, a fever over 99, chills, and nausea. She says she called the COVID hotline twice Thursday morning.
After leaving voice messages and just trying to maintain in contact, no one has gotten in touch with me.
I read the grad student a June 15th email from Father Jenkins, in which he promises that when students arrive on campus, all of our initiatives related to prevention, testing, will be fully operational.
I think the phrase fully operational is just completely erroneous.
Fear and uncertainty, that's how
She saw my story last Wednesday about a Notre Dame student who tested positive for coronavirus being quarantined at the Foundry.
My mom was so mad.
She says she woke up Thursday to several calls and texts from her mom and boyfriend telling her to be careful.
I do have an autoimmune disease, so I do have to be a little bit more cautious about, my interactions.
She says she would be particularly vulnerable if she got the virus.
I can have a tendency to get sick easier.
She says her mother's concern was the empty apartment next door.
After your story, my mom was like, what if they're putting people in any empty room?
She says she reached out to the Foundry Thursday morning. She got this reply a few hours later. Notre Dame took out a master lease at one of our new buildings. An email blast will be sent out later today addressing this.
I don't think this lady knew that that's where I live.
Assistant Vice President Dennis Brown responded, throughout the summer, Notre Dame made arrangements with properties near the campus to place students in quarantine or isolation. In the interest of the medical privacy of our students, we are not revealing these locations. I reached out to Elizabeth Gray, a research scientist in health policy and management at George Washington University. She told me, it's unfortunate to see people using HIPAA as justification to withhold information when HIPAA doesn't apply to the situation. In other words, she says HIPAA law doesn't prevent Notre Dame from sharing where they house quarantined students with other students. He says there's a key difference between testing for students and for the entire football team.
It includes coaches and staff who were mandated to be tested. So it's different.
Using Notre Dame football testing data released today and comparing it to the Notre Dame COVID dashboard numbers released today, a fifth of all Notre Dame's testing since August 3rd has been administered to members of the football program.
We felt we should have a regimen that tested them whether or not they were showing symptoms.
But that's the grad student's point. As Brown says, it's the university that has mandated testing for the football program.
So why can't you make the students mandated for tests?
Looking at the ACC's July 29th report, in the sport of football, all members of the football team shall be tested each week, beginning with the week of the first competition against an opposing team. For Notre Dame, the ACC's testing mandate doesn't take effect until September. So the decision to test the football program frequently is the university's as of right now, not an ACC requirement. Every faculty member I spoke to referred back to Notre Dame President John Jenkins' May 26th op-ed in the New York Times. The differences came in the ways they talked about it.
I think it's important to remember the biggest single decision was made unilaterally by John Jenkins back in May.
Sociology professor Richard Williams criticizes Jenkins' central claim that some risks are worth taking, and that reopening the university for in-person classes this fall is one of those worthwhile risks.
Well, if you want to take those risks, fine, but why you have the right to force everybody else to take those risks with you?
There are currently 2 online petitions, one that celebrates Jenkins' decision to reopen in person, and one that calls on Notre Dame to send students home if they want to continue with online classes. Williams is one of the creators of the second petition, and he says while many aspects of the campus reopening went well, the fact that students were switched to online classes after 1 week back signals a major problem with Notre Dame's plan.
Its first full test was done on 15,000 students, faculty, and staff. And that did not go well.
The university's policy and goal is to provide live in-person instruction to our students. And it strikes me that having that as the baseline makes good sense.
When Notre Dame President Reverend John Jenkins, seen here, attended the Rose Garden nomination ceremony for Judge Amy Coney Barrett on Saturday, his decision to not wear a mask set off a social media firestorm at Notre Dame. Do you want him to be forced to resign because of this?
It's necessary to send the message that you can't just continue to fail as a leader and then send empty apologies.
Ashton Weber is one of 3 Notre Dame juniors who decided to create this Student Senate resolution. It calls for Jenkins to resign for, quote, failure to comply with COVID-19 protocols. They posted it just after 3 p.m. on Sunday, and 24 hours later, it had the required 200 student signatures. Tomorrow, the Student Senate will review the resolution.
He's a repeat offender, and if he were a student, he would have been expelled.
He's referring to this photo taken in early August, which shows Jenkins shoulder to shoulder with Notre Dame students. He's wearing a mask in the photo, but some students and faculty criticized Jenkins for not following the university's social distancing guidelines. On Monday, Jenkins emailed this apology to students, faculty, and staff. He writes in part, "I regret my error of judgment in not wearing a mask during the ceremony and by shaking hands with a number of people in the Rose Garden. I failed to lead by example at a time when I've asked everyone else in the Notre Dame community to do so." Receiving this apology email less than 2 months after a similar email, the 3 students say, feels like an empty gesture.
I know that some of the statements in that email are not true.
Ashton points to this photo from the Rose Garden ceremony. The man sitting to the right of Jenkins with a mask on is G. Marcus Cole, Dean of the Notre Dame Law School.
That's what really makes me most angry about the email. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate decision not to match the actions taken by the man next to him.
And the national reaction on social media to Notre Dame students rushing the field during a pandemic was just as swift. Jenkins notified students the day after that he was disappointed and that exit testing before semester's end would be mandatory. Articles from national outlets followed.
He comes out today and wants to take a shot at the students. What kind of leader are you?
And it became a point of focus on certain shows as well.
The partying is more concerning than rushing the field.
This time with few masks in sight.
Photos I saw from a lot of parties, the crowds were pretty dense, and I didn't see many masks.
And there's reason to be concerned about these photos. If you look at Notre Dame's COVID dashboard, the window of 4 to 6 days after Halloween weekend saw spikes in positive cases, with 39, 72, and 40 new cases during that time. It's the highest 3-day span since mid-August, when President Jenkins shut down campus and switched classes to online only. If there were spikes following Halloween parties, what might the numbers look like following parties surrounding the Clemson game?
That was just very disruptive to my learning. I had to take everything online. It just wasn't the same. I was forced to do online. It wasn't my fault. I was contact traced.
As a freshman, Ella Murphy isn't just dealing with the adjustment to Notre Dame's rigorous academics. She's been forced to switch back and forth between in-person classes and online classes 3 times.
Students that are forced to quarantine are forced to do online for weeks at a time, possibly.
It found more than 1,500 of the 3,700 students surveyed were experiencing moderate to serious psychological distress. In response, Notre Dame Provost Marie-Lynn Miranda emailed faculty on October 21st explaining the results and asking them to consider dropping an assignment or a low grade, canceling class for a day, things like that. But because it was a request and not mandatory, some students say the provost's email didn't change anything.
4 of my professors did not even address the email at all. And one professor did address it in class, mentioned that he understood that we were very stressed, and then gave us another assignment.
Olivia Rubin, Ella Murphy, and 2 others decided to do something about it. They posted a petition asking the university to offer an optional pass, no credit grading system for the fall semester. It had to require 200 student signatures in 4 hours and hit 1,000 within the week. By the time the Student Senate considered it on October 29th, it had 1,300 signatures. The Student Senate passed it 30-4 with 1 abstaining. The 4 students were hopeful the university would agree.